The history of mankind has been inevitably accompanied by wars. It is hard to think of a single year in the last 10,000 years when at least one civilization has not fought another. And as awful as it may sound, humans are very good at waging war. From the birth of ancient Greece to the present day, men have come up with more ways to kill and maim their fellow human beings than devices to cure them. And sometimes, military engineers have come up with mechanisms that shock even modern engineers. We are now going to tell you how the first arrow machine gun was invented in ancient Korea, why the entire Roman army was afraid of Archimedes, and why they used to strap missiles to cats in the Middle Ages. In 214 BC, the Roman Republic laid siege to the Sicilian city of Syracuse in an attempt to gain strategic control of the island. General Marcus Claudius Marcellus led a fleet of 60 Roman warships across the Strait of Messina and attacked head-on, while the second part of the army attacked on land. But as the noose around the city tightened, the mighty Roman army found itself facing an unexpected opponent, Archimedes. No matter what the Romans threw at him, Archimedes was always 3 steps ahead. The ballistae atop the outer walls smashed the advancing cavalry. At sea, the claw of Archimedes lifted whole ships out of the water and smashed them into a shower of rubble, and soldiers and slaves screaming in terror. The siege dragged on for 2 years in an epic war battle. During the siege, it is believed that Archimedes developed a weapon so devastating that it was capable of burning ships to ashes at a distance of 500 feet, and it required only a few drops of water. The device was deceptively simple. A copper pipe was heated over embers with a hollow clay slug inside. When it was sufficiently heated, some water was introduced into the pipe underneath the projectile. The water instantly evaporated, propelling the projectile toward the advancing ships. On impact, the clay missile exploded, spraying combustible chemicals on the wooden ships. Archimedes' steam cannon remained a matter of bitter controversy for a long time. Many did not believe such a weapon could really exist, but a team from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology managed to build a working model of the cannon using its original description. They calculated that their metal bullet weighing a pound was fired with twice the kinetic energy of a .50 caliber M2 machine gun. If the projectile had not been launched directly into a wall of mud, it could have flown a distance of 1,200 meters, and it only took half a glass of water to fire it. By the way, the Romans also had their own equally amazing weapons, such as the ballista. This weapon was essentially a giant crossbow mounted on a cart, but its arc was not bent like a normal crossbow. Instead, solid beams of wood were placed between twisted coils of rope. When the lever was wound, the ends of the arc rotated in the opposite direction and twisted the bowstring, creating tension. Historians say that ancient Rome used the tendons of old working oxen to create the bowstring for the ballista, because only they could withstand the incredible tension that the ballista created. It was a very powerful weapon, but one bow on a weapon was not enough for the Chinese. They wanted to put 3 at once. The evolution of the multi-bow ballista was gradual, beginning in the Tang Dynasty with the crossbow, which used 2 bows for extra power. Records from that period show that this bow could shoot an iron bolt at 3,600 feet, 3 times farther than other siege crossbows. But 200 years later, the invasion of the Mongols inspired the Chinese to add another arc to the arc ballista. It is believed that the Mongol horde, frightened by these powerful defensive machines, hired Chinese engineers to create their own 3-bow weapons. Ultimately, the course of the war was reversed in favor of the Mongols. But we all know that China's chief military invention was not the arc ballista, but gunpowder. And its invention compelled the Chinese to come up with innovative ways to use the combustive mixture. Having no idea what a gunpowder weapon should look like, they came up with some of the strangest weapons the world has ever seen. For example, fire spears, the first examples of which appeared around the 10th century. They were spears attached to bamboo tubes that could shoot fire and shrapnel several meters away. Some fired lead pellets, others released poisonous gas, and others fired arrows. Soon enough, they made way for pure firing tubes, as troops abandoned lances in favor of cheap disposable bamboo cannons that fired only once, but could be mass-produced and fired one after the other. The barrels were often combined, resulting in an almost endless stream of death. Out of the depths of this creative mayhem came the fire-spitting tube. Historians call this weapon a flamethrower, but that description is not entirely accurate. Such a weapon could produce continuous bursts of flame for 5 minutes using a low nitrate form of gunpowder. But it wasn't enough for the Chinese to burn their enemies alive on the battlefield. They decided to make the flamethrower even more deadly and added arsenic oxide to the mixture. The toxic smoke caused vomiting and convulsions. In addition, the barrel was often stuffed with razor-sharp shards of porcelain. The result was instantaneous lacerations accompanied by a bath of poisonous fire. If their enemy was not killed on the spot, his insides would gradually stop working due to the effects of the arsenic. Eventually, he would fall into a coma and die. China's neighbors were not lagging behind in military progress either. In the 16th century, Korea significantly progressed in mastering gunpowder and built its own machines that could rival the Chinese flamethrowers. Korea's secret weapon was the Hwacha, a multi-missile launcher capable of launching over 100 rockets in a single salvo. Larger versions could launch as many as 200 rockets. These things were a significant threat to the Japanese invaders. The ammunition of the Hwacha was an explosive arrow. The device's fuses were adjusted depending on the distance to the opponent, so that they exploded on impact. When the Japanese invasion began in full force in 1592, Korea already had hundreds of these fire carts. Perhaps the greatest test of the Hwacha's strength was the Battle of Hangzhou in 1593. When Japan launched an offensive of 30,000 troops in the hilltop toward Hangzhou Fortress, the fortress had barely 3,000 soldiers, citizens, and fighting monks standing to defend it. The chances of defending the fortress were extremely low, and the Japanese forces moved forward in confidence, unaware that the fortress had one trump card up its sleeve: the 40 Hwachas mounted atop the outer walls. The Japanese samurai attempted to climb the hill 9 times, constantly encountering a rain of infernal flames. More than 10,000 Japanese died before they decided to abandon the siege, the first major Korean victory over the Japanese invasion. In Europe, gun inventors did not restrain their imagination in any way at all, so much so that today, some military inventors would surely be condemned for animal cruelty. For in 1530 AD, the artillery master Franz Helm of Cologne in Germany invented the use of missile cats for sieges. He wrote a military siege manual. It included descriptions of every conceivable and inconceivable bomb. Then, he added a section advising siege armies to find a cat. Any cat, he said, to come from the city you are trying to defeat. Tie a bomb to it. In theory, the cat would return home and then burn down the whole town. Whether or not that happened is not for us to determine, but probably not. According to Mitch Frost, a University of Pennsylvania scholar who had the pleasure of being the first to translate this siege text, there is no historical evidence that anyone ever tried to carry out Helm's proposed scheme. In this scenario, the most likely results would be your own burnt-out camp. But one shouldn't think that while warriors in Asia were already making full use of firearms, cats with bombs tied to them were running around Europe. By the 16th century, full-fledged firearms had already arrived there, and Europeans began to realize that if they combined bladed weapons with guns, it would be twice as awesome. That's how sword guns, axe guns, and other perversions came about. But here's a really cool weapon found in King Henry VIII's arsenal, the shield gun. These weapons were essentially wooden discs with a gun through the center, though they varied in some places. Some are padded with iron on the front, and others had a metal grill above the gun for aiming. For a long time, it was thought that these weapons were considered rather decorative curiosities, and therefore of little historical interest. Most of them went to various museums, where they were dusted on stands along with other strange medieval artifacts. However, the Victoria and Albert Museum in Britain recently studied samples of such shields and discovered that they may have been more common than most historians initially thought. So, they decided to collect as many of these shields as possible and study them carefully. It turns out that some of these gun shields had power scorches, meaning they had been used. Some were designed to block the enemy boarding a ship, where they were apparently used as an additional protective layer in a line of defensive fire. Eventually, with the decline of chivalry, such weapons disappeared, and linear warfare tactics emerged, where a soldier's life wasn't worth much. Such gadgets were forgotten by history, along with many other weapons of antiquity that were not recorded in historical documents, and any samples left were lost. Which unusual weapons do you know about? Write in the comments. And also, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and give us a like. See you around!